Good morning to you. Well, it's a fairly quiet Sunday morning and the sky's fairly clear after all the rain from last night. But as promised, I said that I would do the second half of the video that I did yesterday, where I was listing all the things that have happened in the last, well, it's really 3 years now, isn't it? If we go back to December 19, when the whole COVID thing kicked off. And I'd like to just start with 2 verses of scripture. In fact, it's Isaiah chapter 5, but I'm looking at it and I'm pretty sure actually that it makes a lovely Bible study on its own. But I just want to take the 2 verses here, verses 20 and 21. There's a backdrop to the second half of this video. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. And of course that's come to the fore more than ever, hasn't it? Men that are wise in their own eyes, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Can't get enough of it, can they? It's not just one piece of fruit, it's endless pieces of fruit until they get to that culmination. So before I start, I had a strange thought now. I was walking again in one of my graveyard haunts. Back there is the St Andrew's Church in Mutford. It's about a mile back down the road, and I was walking around and I was thinking to myself, of course it obviously couldn't have happened, but what if Jesus had failed in his mission? What if somehow Lucifer, somehow the devil had managed to trick him or secure a foothold in Jesus' life in any way? Well, it's unimaginable, isn't it? It's as unimaginable really as trying to imagine God himself. It couldn't have happened. But if it did happen, one can't imagine the sorry state that this universe would be in. But as far as the world is concerned, that's exactly what has happened. Yuval Noah Harari, who I've spoken of before, he calls Jesus fake news. And he thinks that he can gain everlasting life through artificial means. Well, he's sadly mistaken. All these prudent that are wise in their own eyes are sadly mistaken. So carrying on from yesterday, if you didn't see yesterday's video, I would recommend that you do, because I'm listing 50 things that have taken place in the last 3 years, really. And I'm listing these things and have listed these things because I believe they prove that we are in the time being described as the birth pains that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24. So I'm going to carry on with this list, and I'm going to go to number 26. And I've got down here, government corruption and hypocrisy. Laws made for the masses, but broken by the lawmakers. We saw that very clearly in what they called the Partygate scandal here in the UK, where Boris Johnson and his friends were bringing their own booze to the Downing Street parties. And it's quite interesting because somebody was saying, why is it they brought their own liquor to a government party? They reckon that Downing Street has probably got one of the biggest wine cellars, or one of the most well-stocked wine cellars in government circles. The thing is, they were doing it because they didn't want to be detected. Any wines or anything that was taken out of government cellars would have had to have been recorded. And so they decided to have their parties while everybody else was in lockdown. While everybody else was following their rules, they were breaking their rules. And it just went to show, didn't it, what kind of people we have in leadership, what kind of people we have in government. They realized quite soon that this flu situation, as it was, beginning with the word COVID, wasn't really a serious disease to most people. They knew it, but they had to keep up the pretense and the hypocrisy. And so we began to see, didn't we, how poor our leadership was across the world. Not just in the UK, but everywhere else. People breaking their own rules. Even the man that created the models for the lockdowns in this country, I can't think of his name offhand now, but he was even caught with a woman that wasn't his wife during the lockdowns. Hypocrisy on a massive scale. 27. Artificially created crisis to destroy fossil fuel industries in favour of wind and solar. The green agenda. We've seen this rolled out, haven't we? We've been watching it being rolled out for quite some time now, but we've never seen it come out in plain sight the way it is now. The destruction of a way of life that we have known for so long, that has benefited the nations of the earth, that has brought successful industry into our heartlands. Now we're beginning to see, aren't we, how it's all being brushed aside to set up windmills, turbines, relying on something that isn't really possible to rely on. And now certain countries, I believe Germany in particular, is realizing that they have to fire up the power stations again because there isn't sufficient power to use for wind and solar. Deliberate collapsing of the world economy, which these fuels are based upon. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on this list. I just want to give you an understanding of where we're at and how the green agenda is beginning to move on. 28. Destruction of meat processing plants and government expropriation of farmland. This is particularly prevalent in the Netherlands. We hear about the burning down of meat processing plants. I believe particularly in the US this has been reported. Farmers have been out in protest in the Netherlands because the government wants to shut down a large percentage of farms, making the excuse that too much methane is being produced by livestock, too much nitrogen is going up into the atmosphere. We're constantly assailed with these lies because they want to produce an economy that isn't based on something that's going to benefit the masses. It's only going to benefit the elite, those that will sit in sumptuous places and eat sumptuous food, while the rest of us are feeding on bugs, insects, soya beans. 29. Mass protests. Dutch farmers and Canadian truckers. The cancel culture, I called it. I think that's a term actually that is quite well known now. The cancel culture. People being censored for their views. And as I said yesterday, people going out in protest and nothing being reported by the media. We saw what they did to the Canadian truckers, how their bank accounts were frozen. Anybody supporting the Canadian truckers had their bank accounts frozen. Totalitarianism rising up in the West, and it's almost worse than it was in the East. Number 30, marketing campaigns for meatless products, promoting the eating of insects, especially in schools. Crickets, I believe, has been on the menu. People are walking around with their eyes closed. They're not noticing things. They're not noticing what's being put before them in plain sight. Constantly being assailed. Marketing is a very powerful thing. I used to teach it myself. I was at one time a lecturer in business studies. And we looked at how marketing models worked and the way that people thought and the psychology behind it, and how you could get into the mind of people by placing certain products in certain places, using certain colors, using certain people to promote it, as I said yesterday about the Hollywood celebrities. It's getting more and more intense. Everything is getting more and more intense. The birth pains are becoming more and more frequent and more intense. another heading I've got down here, and they're very loose headings because, as I said, a lot of the things overlap in this list. Technology and globalism. Some time back I produced a leaflet called The Biggest Lie of All. Many of you will know the leaflet and possibly might be talking to people who actually emailed me for it, and I sent it out by PDF, and it's gone out across the world. And the basis of that leaflet, well, it was a gospel tract, but the basis of it was what's described here in number 31, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And this is a term coined by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. And the whole concept behind the Fourth Industrial Revolution is the progression of what's happened from the beginning. How we saw the steam revolution, the first industrial revolution, where all the woolen mills and the steel mills started up, going back to, I mean, my history is not great, I think it was the 1850s. And then the second industrial revolution, the coming of electricity, and the way that began to fire things up even more and more industries taking on a cleaner kind of fuel. And then third, which started really in the 1990s, which was the digital revolution, the growth of the home PC, and how easy it's been made for us to sit at home and work from laptops and from personal computers and be able to use various programs. And of course it's benefited us, hasn't it, a great deal. But the fourth industrial revolution is something different. Yuval Noah Harari, again, describes it as the under-the-skin revolution. No more will technology be just something we use, but it'll be something that'll be part of us. All this has been burbling in the background for quite a number of years, but it's only now that it's really starting to come to the fore. And these technologies are being developed at an incredible rate. Which takes me to 32. The MNRA, you know what? I won't use that word. The thing they put under the skin. And of course Elon Musk and his Neuralink. And then we have biometrics, again going to be used for surveillance, much more than ever before. And another word that's been coined, and well, I say coined, it's been around for quite some decades, and it's becoming more to the fore with MNRA technology, and that's nanotechnology. The whole concept of particles that are almost as small as atoms that can be injected into your body. I'll be doing another video separately on this, and how these things can move around your body and detect certain illnesses, detect certain genetic mistakes, if you like, and literally repair them while you're on the go. So these are I must be honest, they're incredible technologies, but at the same time used for nefarious purposes. Elon Musk, of course, we know he speaks with two tongues. He just bought Twitter and says everything's great and all have free speech, and at the same time he wants to put something in your brain that is going to take you completely away from free speech. The hypocrisy gets more and more intense, doesn't it? So the under-the-skin technologies. 33, central bank digital currencies. Programmable money. The social credit score. The money in itself, through the technology, deciding what you can do, where you can go. And of course, what you can do and where you can go will affect who you are connected to, who you meet with. What shops do you shop at? What locations do you visit frequently? Are you subversive? Programmable money, the cashless system, developing. As we know, China is at the forefront of this system with the social credit score. And Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum holds China up as a role model. Says this is going to be great. This is what we need, the Chinese model. Total control. The digital wallet is another name for what they're calling it. All this is coming to the fore now. Governments, our Prime Minister himself talking about these central bank digital currencies and how they're going to develop. They simply want our minds. This is what it's all about. Another heading I've got here for number 34. The harm that was caused, that's now coming to prominence. The harm that was caused by the you-know-what. That they put under the skin. More and more people suffering adverse effects. Only yesterday I was looking at a list of excess deaths. People that were dying because of the harms that were caused by it. I've actually linked that to number 35. Excess deaths, 1,500 plus excess deaths every week in the UK. That's what's being recorded now. People will say, yes, it's because the NHS isn't working properly. Our health system is broken down, which is partly true. But at the same time, as much as they're pushing to get this thing into the arm even more and more, people are being harmed. People have died. But the mainstream media won't touch it. It's 36. I need to be careful how I actually put these two words together, because I think the algorithm is onto this one. But when I refer to death that can happen very quickly, you know, the S word also has an LY at the end. You might have seen a video that came out recently. First word being died, and the second word ending with that word, you know what I'm talking about. That happens very quickly. I think if I use that term, I possibly might be picked up. So if you haven't seen the film, the initials are DS, I recommend that you do. Hundreds of sportsmen and women, athletes, people that are fully fit, that have never had any kind of heart trouble at all, nothing wrong with their bodies, all of a sudden they're developing myocarditis, developing arrhythmia. I was only listening yesterday to a testimony of a young man of 26. He'd been an actor in Hollywood, and he'd had 2 of the you-know-whats, and developed terrible arrhythmia. Fortunately, the Lord has healed him. But people are just dying with no explanation. My own next-door neighbour, only in her early 50s, was found dead in her bed some months ago. And as far as we know, she didn't have any underlying causes. But again, apparently the post-mortem didn't reveal anything. And so it goes on. The deception goes on and on. 37. The climate change agenda being rolled out worldwide. And of course we saw how Satan is using people as pawns, using the United Nations to bring in little children like Greta Thunberg. There are others now that are coming up, rearing up, being used to castigate world governments, pointing their finger at them, telling them how evil they are for not responding to the emergency, they call it. If you talk to any climatologist who's got their head screwed on, they'll tell you there is no emergency. We might certainly be seeing cyclic change in various parts of the world, which isn't the first time. But they're rolling out the agenda, aren't they, worldwide? And of course we saw recently, I did a video on the 10 climate commandments. This man that got up and broke 2 tablets on the top of what they, was not really Mount Sinai, they called it Mount Sinai, but he took these 2 tablets up to the top of this mountain and then broke them. Then I shared in the video about the 10 climate commandments. I won't go into that now. But it's going on and on and on. Another heading I've got here. The church and the social situation. Number 38. Persecution of Christians. The arrest of preachers. The cancelling of anyone that dissents or speaks out against the narrative. Everything now is becoming hate speech. The Bible itself is becoming hate speech. We're beginning to see, aren't we, how the hatred for the Word of God is now becoming mainstream, if you like. And the LGBTQ lobbies that have stood up against it. I believe there was one man, I don't remember the name of him, who was arrested in the middle of the town square here in the UK because he simply quoted the scriptures. Persecution of Christians. Jesus said it, didn't he? Matthew 24. They will deliver you up and you will be betrayed and there will be a great falling away. I won't go into detail, as I say. I'll continue with the list, but those of you that are aware of that, if you're not, I suggest that you make yourself aware, because as time goes on, it's going to become more and more difficult for us who preach and teach the Word of God. 39. And here I'm just changing tack a little bit here, because yesterday I was talking about Mr. Trump, and I said that I wasn't an American, but I necessarily supported him in most of what he did. He did some great things while he was president. There certainly possibly wouldn't even have been a war in the Ukraine if he'd still been president. But, again, I want to put this into careful wording. He held an event at Mar-a-Lago recently when he lined up with Joe Biden's new law on the respect of marriage. And he spoke about his support for marriage along those lines. Same-sex marriage. And shockingly, he actually came out and said that he was in support of it and that he would work very hard to ensure that those rights would be given. Whether we're talking about legal rights, somebody might say to me, yes, he's talking in terms of legal rights. The point is, it's the support. And many Christians are starting to feel betrayed by what Mr. Trump did. Those of you that are not familiar with the Mar-a-Lago event or the Respect of Marriages Act in the US, I suggest you research that. But it just shows you that we support men, don't we? We put men in charge, we laud them, we put them on pedestals, and then they do something that lets us down. We might excuse the one here or there, but then something else pops up. And we start to see that really they're no different to any other politician. Number 40. The rise of the World Economic Forum's open blasphemy. Yuval Noah Harari is growing more and more in prominence. One of his books is titled Sapiens. I believe it's selling by the millions over the world. And people are entertaining this man. And he actually states in not so many words that he would rather worship the Antichrist than worship any kind of God of the Bible. And he's the man that's pushing the term under the skin. He's a homosexual, he's an Israeli, which is quite interesting because in the book of Daniel, the Antichrist is spoken of as somebody that would have no regard for women. And he would talk of a god of forces, which is what Harari really is talking about here, in terms of pushing the whole agenda of artificial intelligence. He's talking of the god of forces. And so we're probably going to see more and more of him, and we're going to see more of his type, I should imagine, coming to prominence. Much worse than him, until we get to a final culmination of the revelation of the man of sin. 41. How events can change in countries in such a rapid period of time. And 41 here, I've just got the death of Queen Elizabeth, virtually within 1 week, or within a month, or a space of a short period of weeks anyway, I'm not quite sure. But the death of Queen Elizabeth, the rise of King Charles, and then 3 prime ministers in succession, from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak. All this suddenly ballooned in a matter of a short space of time, changing the face of the nation here in the UK. And it's explosive when something like that happens all at once. It's like a train moves along at a certain speed, doesn't it? And suddenly you come to a stop, And perhaps you haven't arrived at a station, but perhaps the train is just gearing up for some reason. Maybe it's waiting for a change of signal or something. And it waits for a minute or two, and then it moves on. You're still on the train, you're still moving to the destination, but you get pockets where nothing is really taking place, and all of a sudden you get a sudden surge of events. And those were big events that happened in the UK all at once. Some people are actually talking of King Charles as the Antichrist. I actually met King Charles some years ago when I worked as a Samaritan. Samaritan is an organisation it's a helpline for anybody who's feeling desperate or suicidal. And King Charles came to, because he was a patron at the time, I think, of the Samaritans, and he came to meet with our branch. And to be honest with you, I didn't think that he really was. He didn't really make an awful impression on me as a man. And I don't subscribe to the idea that he's the Antichrist. He certainly is. If you look at his heraldry and you look at all the symbolism, for sure, yes, he's a prominent and important person, because he's paralleled up with Klaus Schwab with the Great Reset. But I'm not convinced that he's the Antichrist. But we're seeing all these events take place, sudden news events. Be prepared for more this year. 42. The prominence of occult rituals. And I'm thinking particularly of the Commonwealth Games that took place in Birmingham last year. How we saw the worship of this entity, which was a bull, basically a giant-sized bull, and a woman riding it, and people bowing down. More and more prominence of the occult. And the other day there was an advert. I can't remember the program, unfortunately. Those of you that are in the UK might have seen it. It showed a red quilted bull with a lady actually riding it, and she was dressed in virtually nothing. And I can't remember what program it was they were actually advertising. But the symbolism again, the woman riding the beast. More and more rituals coming to the fore. Those of you that saw the opening of the CERN tunnel some years ago, I think it was called the Gotthard Tunnel, connected to CERN. Please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But it was an enormous occult ritual. And the symbolism is missed by most people because they've never looked into it. People will be more and more looking towards symbolism to illustrate the message that they want to get across. 43. Once secret plans that now revealed in plain sight through the World Economic Forum. Another prominence of the rise of the New World Order is that things that were kept secret before, those of you that are aware of the Bilderberg meetings many years ago, I don't know if they're still taking place, but world leaders, businessmen, royalty, even actors and celebrities would come together once a year at these meetings, and they would arrive in cars with blacked out windows. There would be no media to actually be present at these meetings. No minutes were taken, nothing recorded. But these prominent men would meet once a year. And if you were of someone of any note, then you would be invited to a Bilderberg meeting. Now it's the World Economic Forum, and they meet in Davos, and they're telling us in plain sight what their plans are. And this is how the enemy works. He knows that he can deceive people even by just speaking lies to their face. And we're going to be seeing more and more of that coming to prominence. No more secret meetings, everything in plain sight. Number 44. One world religion based on climate change, or using climate change, shall I say, as a tool, a catalyst to bring about this concept that we all must look to the common good. And this is now moving into the world of religion. The idea that we must tolerate all faiths. As we know, King Charles has said that he wants to be not defender of the faith, but defender of faiths. And we're going to be seeing this as his coronation takes place in June this year. And of course, spearheading this is of course the Pope, bringing together the world's main religions. Those of you would have heard the term Chrislam, all coming to the fore. Everything is starting to culminate, isn't it? I think it's, I'm not sure if it's in Saudi Arabia, again correct me in the comments, but there is a place where there are 3 buildings that have been built, excuse me, and I think the one is dedicated to Judaism, one to Islam, one to Christianity, and they're separate, but they're all on one site, and it seems to be touted as some sort of a place of peace and harmony, where we're going to be seeing the world coming together for the common good. I used to be a lecturer, excuse me, I'm just going to have a little bit of a sip to get the throat open. I used to be a lecturer in business ethics, and I'm beginning to see how this whole concept of the common good is coming to the fore. In ethics, we called it utilitarianism, produced by the philosophers who put forth the concept of the greater good. Whatever's done, it could be a war, it could be a situation where many people get killed, say 100,000 people get killed, but it's for the saving of millions. In other words, the greater good will sacrifice a small amount of people for the greater good. One of the campaign of, I think it was on the Normandy beaches, when the troops were delivered from Dunkirk at the beginning of the war, there was a group of soldiers that had to look as though they were attacking the German army. In fact, they were going to attack the German army in order to distract the forces that were coming across the English Channel to rescue something like 300,000 soldiers that were stuck on the beaches and had to get back to the UK. So they had to use an army to distract what was going on in the Channel. And I think it was something like 4,000 men. Again, correct me in the comments, but several thousand people died in order for the greater good. And that was a war campaign. But this is something much more nefarious. 45. The falling away has begun in earnest in the church. The sex scandals, those of us that have been following what's been happening with Hillsong, and the way that the high-profile people in government, high-profile people in the churches have been falling through these sex scandals. Men that were once lauded up as having built ministries for God that are now falling away in disgrace. 46. Once men of God, now preaching a globalist gospel of peace and security. I think of men like Rick Warren, Steve Chalk, Archbishop Justin Welby, and the Pope himself. The last two I wouldn't put in the category of preaching the true gospel. But we're beginning to see, aren't we, men that are in the church, and they basically were at one time preaching the truth, preaching the gospel. Steve Chalk was very much involved with youth in the UK, and the development of Christianity amongst the youth. An evangelical, now preaching same-sex marriage. Rick Warren, another one, was, I believe, a Baptist minister. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but also now coming together with world leaders, linking arms, speaking the peace and security. And so it goes on. Collaboration, the church and the world. 47. More frequent events like floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. We saw flooding in Pakistan recently. And I believe that wasn't, it was flooded in areas that were not actually areas that usually do flood. Extreme weather. And of course it's all put down to man-made climate change. We'll need to be careful how we discern that. and realize that what man is wanting to do in terms of getting us to think green has nothing to do with what God will also start doing as we see more and more lives lost due to things like earthquakes. I did a video some time back, and I produced some lists of all the earthquakes, all the famines, all the wars over the centuries. And we're seeing more and more of them more and more frequently. 48. We're starting to see everyone coming together with one voice. It isn't just the religions, but the religions are coming together with humanistic voices and world government leaders. The group think is developing more than ever before. There's only one narrative they want you to follow, and that's the narrative they give you, the food they want you to swallow, spoonful by spoonful. 49. Mass distraction stories in the news media, dumbing down the senses of the populace. At the moment in the UK and probably worldwide, especially in the US, we see the Harry and Meghan scandal going on. These things are looming larger and larger, as though they're the most important things that we must take note of. Whereas in the background, the real news is going on. And we're not seeing that. And they're coming together, as I've said earlier on, producing all these concepts, ideas in plain sight. But let's get you distracted. Let's get you watching soap operas. Let's get you watching Netflix. Let's just take note of all these purposeless things. The shenanigans of a couple of people, a couple of young people that have dissented away from a family that has basically been corrupt from the start anyway. I've spoken before about the Queen, the situation with the Queen, and what her connections were to Druidism in the past, and all the heraldry and all the symbolism that goes along with the royal family. And so this becomes a fascination in people's minds. And finally, now of course, this is a very rough list, let me just say this, and as you go back on it, I'm sure you can probably tie it up a lot more neatly than I have. But I'm just going to end with this, and that's Israel. What we see taking place in Israel. Remember, the gospel begun and will end in the land of Israel. It's God's purposeful place for where everything ends up and where everything is going in eternity. And at the moment, there's a new man on the block that's risen to prominence. I believe his name is Shlomo Yehuda. He's a young man in his early 30s, and he's being hailed like a Messiah in Israel. I think some 5 or 6 miracles have now been attributed to him. Healing of cancers, heart disease. And he has a kind of a singing ministry with a keyboard, and he sings songs to the effect that he's the light of the nations. He looks a very unassuming young man. He wears a hat that tends to be pushed over his eyes. But we're beginning to see, aren't we, the preparations for the end time. The moves towards constructing a third temple. All the preparations being made there by the Orthodox. The coming in of the red heifers, which I believe 5 red heifers from Texas came in for the development of the sacrifices that were done in the temple in the old days. The changes of government in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu back in power. So many different strategic things taking place across the earth. We're starting to see what looks like the beginning of a Gog and Magog situation, where Russia and Turkey and Syria are coming together in talks. And of course, the Ezekiel 38 speaks about this alliance with those nations. Everything's starting to come together and to knit together. And God revealing his plans as well for us in these last days. I refer you back to some videos I did a long time back, about a year ago, on Romans 9, 10 and 11, on God's purpose and destiny for Israel. Israel is the focal point for our faith. Let's keep our eyes on it. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Mr. Harari is an Israeli, and he's come to prominence in the way that he has. Let's keep our eyes on that central part of the Middle East. I've got a saying here, which I'm going to end with. Little phrase. Satan's time is here. The beast has risen. There is a rush to complete the New World Order system for the Antichrist. I'll repeat that. Satan's time is here. The beast has risen. There is a rush to complete the New World system for the Antichrist. The whole purpose of this, all these 50 things that I've referred to, they all culminate in one thing. That's the worship of the enemy, the worship of Lucifer, the worship of the devil. And that's his intent behind all these moves, all the people that he's using, like pawns on a chessboard. It's all coming together because Satan knows his time is short. And he wants to go out with a blaze of, well, his blaze of glory, one big finale. And it's coming soon. When Jesus was on the mountain and he looked down, and the devil came along and said, all these kingdoms I will give you if you bow down and worship me. And that was what I was saying in the beginning of the video. That what if Jesus had failed? What if for that split second he'd given way? But we can praise God, can't we? That he made no mistakes. He is our sinless Lord. And he will always be the one that died for us, the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the earth. So I commit those to you, and let's just keep our eyes peeled in this coming year for what, not just for what the enemy wants to do, but for what God wants to do inside us. Because the world is more and more topsy-turvy. They're speaking light for darkness and darkness for light, good for evil, evil for good. But let's remember that. And I pray today, if you're going to worship, that it's a blessed day for you and for your family.